Hello and welcome back to Simple-ESL. In today's lesson, we're learning how to talk about things that we do often. This means we will look at adverbs of frequency like always, usually, and sometimes. And we'll also learn how to ask and answer questions like how often. How often do you do things? These are really important skills for everyday conversations, and we use them when we talk about routines, habits, and things we do in our daily life. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to describe your own routines clearly, confidently, and understand other people when they talk about their habits. Before we get started, this is an A2 level lesson. So have a look at that information and let's get started. In this lesson, we have three main objectives. First, we will learn how to use adverbs of frequency correctly in sentences. These adverbs will help us to explain how often something happens, and they are a key part of everyday English. Second, we will learn how to ask and answer questions with how often. This question, is formed usually very common when talking about habits, routines, and activities. So it's very common form when talking about these things. Finally, we will practice talking about our own daily routines using adverbs. By the end of the lesson, as I've said, you will be able to describe what you do regularly, occasionally, or rarely, and understand other people when they do the same. And this is really useful. We use adverbs of frequency all the time in everyday English, often without even noticing. They help us describe our habits and routines clearly. For example, we might say, I always eat breakfast, or she never plays football. These short adverbs like always, usually, and sometimes, and never give important information about how often something happens. When we understand these adverbs and use them correctly, it becomes much easier to talk about our daily life, explain our routines, and understand other people when they talk about theirs. That's why learning these skills will be so helpful for everyday communication in English. Now let's look at adverbs of frequency and how we use them. These adverbs tell us how often something happens. I've given you rough measurements so we can try to use these. Some of the most common: always, always. This means every single time, 100% of the time. This always happens. I always breathe. I always walk. These are things that always happen. Usually, 80% of the time, roughly. It's almost 100, but not quite there. Often, we could say about 60% with often. And I'd say sometimes falls into that area as well, about 40% often. Never is the only other absolute. The two absolutes are always, 100% of the time, never, 0% of the time. It never happens. Okay? When I flap my arms, I never fly. It's not possible. I can't fly. Okay? So that is a great way to think of it. Try using those percentages to give you an idea of when you should use these adverbs. So the position of these adverbs is also important. When a sentence uses a normal main verb, the adverb goes before the verb. So for example, I often read books. But when the verb is to be, the adverb goes after the verb. So she is always late. The verb to be, she is always late. Here are two more examples. They usually play football on Sunday. I never eat fish. Understanding the position of the adverbs will help you make clear and natural sentences. Now let's look at how to ask questions with how often. We use this question form when we want to know the frequency of someone's actions or habits. So here's the structure. How often plus do or does. He, she, it does. I, you, we, they do. The subject and the verb. So here are two examples. How often do you watch TV? And here's a response. I usually watch TV in the evening. This is a natural answer. It's a great answer. We'll use another example here. How often does she go to the library? She sometimes goes on Saturday. When answering this type of question, we almost always include an adverb of frequency because it tells the listener clearly how often the activity happens. So let's put this into practice with a gap fill exercise. Fill in with the most accurate adverb. There will be a number of answers we can use for this, but I've given examples. She drinks coffee in the morning. So we could say she never drinks coffee in the morning. We could say usually drinks coffee in the morning. We could say always. So it's 80% of the time. We would say she usually drinks coffee in the morning. We go to school on Saturday. Now in the UK, we go to school on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We never go to school on Saturday. 0%. I read books before bed. This one, once again, could be a wide range of answers, but if I told you it was 40% of the time, we could say sometimes. Okay, so I sometimes read books before bed. They play football at the weekend. Once again, could have used lots of answers for this question, but if I told you it was 60% of the time, you would use often. They often play football at the weekend. He is late for class. Or if I told you it was 100% of the time, what would you use? Always. He is always late for class. So we're going to do correct the mistakes. I want you to read these sentences and find the mistakes and correct them. There'll be something wrong, sometimes two things wrong in each sentence. I go always to bed at 11. Where's the mistake here? Are go and always in the right place? Or should they swap? I always go to bed at 11. She often is late. She often is late. Is this correct? She is often late. We're swapping them round again. He plays never football. What mistakes can you see here? Is it plays or play? They never play football. Do you often goes shopping? Goes? Is that correct with you? Or would it be go? Do you often go shopping? Make sure you're using the correct version of the verb depending on the subject. He don't usually study. Look at the verb. So it's a negative form. He doesn't usually study. Well done if you got those. So let's do a sentence scramble. I want you to put these words in order to make a sentence. Watch you often TV do? I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Do you often watch TV? Let's move on to our next one. Always is he happy? Making a statement about someone being happy always. He is always happy. Football, they play never. They never play football. Do homework usually. I may in the evening. So we could say I usually do my homework in the evening. She does library often the go-to. So she often. Does she often go to the library? Well done if you got those correct. And we have a bit of dialogue completion. Fill in the blanks with adverbs or how often. So if we're asking a question about breakfast, what do we say? How often do you eat breakfast? I always eat breakfast at home. I sometimes eat breakfast at home. I usually eat breakfast at home. I never eat breakfast at home. Fill in that blank with an adverb. And now we have another question. What would we say? How often does your teacher give you homework? She sometimes gives us homework on Monday. She always gives homework on Monday. This is where you would use your adverb of frequency. So, how often do you eat breakfast? My example, I always eat breakfast at home. How often does your teacher give you homework? She usually gives us homework on a Monday. Pick and choose and create your own answers to this gap fill, and hopefully you used how often correctly in those sentences. And a bit of a group discussion. If you have a partner or someone you can ask questions to, this would be a great time to do this. Remember to answer using adverbs of frequency. So here are the questions. How often do you watch TV? My example, I usually watch TV in the evening. How often do you do homework? Here's a possible answer. I often do homework after school. How often does your teacher give you tests? You might say, she sometimes gives us tests on Fridays. How often do you meet your friends? Here's an example answer. I usually meet my friends at the weekend. How often do you read in English? You could say, I sometimes read in English before bed. So have a go at forming your own answers. If you don't have anyone to practice with, write down your own answers and practice them out loud. Use those adverbs of frequency. And let's review what we have learned today. First, we looked at some of the most common adverbs of frequency. Words like always, usually, often, sometimes, and never. These words help us to describe how often something happens. Next, we learned where to place these adverbs in the sentence. We put them before the main verb, but after the verb to be. We also practiced how to ask and answer how often questions. This is a key structure for talking about routines, habits, and everyday activities. Your next steps, your bonus task. I want you to try writing 5 sentences about your own routine using adverbs of frequency. You can also ask 3 how often questions ready to ask a friend or a partner so you can keep practicing normal, natural conversation. If you want more lessons, worksheets, or tutoring discounts, you can scan the QR code or visit the link on screen. Thanks for learning with Simple-ESL, and we will see you in our next lesson.